Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today the topic of my discussion is fate of pyruvate, that what happens to the pyruvate when it is formed. Fate of pyruvate depends upon the availability of oxygen. If pyruvate has availability of oxygen, then it enters normally into the citric acid cycle, that is known as the TCA cycle or Krebs cycle. There are the three names for it. If oxygen is not available in the cell, the pyruvate goes to the different cycle, that is the lactate. It is called as anaerobic metabolism. So here 2x is written, that means two molecules of pyruvate are formed. If you can see that if oxygen is available here, if oxygen is present, then it is known as aerobic metabolism. And if oxygen is not present, if oxygen level decreases, that is known as anaerobic metabolism. If oxygen is present, then this is not the another step going, it is the excess amount of oxygen O2, then it is the aerobic metabolism, and pyruvate is converted into the acetyl CoA, and then it enters the citric acid cycle. If there is a deficiency of oxygen in the body, then there is an anaerobic metabolism and lactate is formed. There is one more case. There is also a step, we say that when oxygen is not present, then the pyruvate is converted to the that is known as alcoholic fermentation, that is converted to the ethanol. So what is that process? That process occurs only in yeast. Yeast is a fungus, we know that. And in yeast cells, when there is less availability or no availability of oxygen, then pyruvate is converted into the alcohol. But in our bodies, the pyruvate is converted into the lactate if oxygen is less available, and if oxygen is more available, then it enters into the citric acid cycle. So when our body is deficient in oxygen during the strenuous muscular exercises, when we do a lot of exercises, then our muscles become deficient in oxygen, then our body forms lactate, so due to which we can also feel the muscle pains after exercises. When oxygen is available, pyruvate enters the mitochondrial membrane and converts itself into the acetyl CoA by an enzyme pyruvate dehydrogenase complex. So as I have also told in my another lecture, that is known as pyruvate dehydrogenase complex is a complex system of enzyme that is composed of 3 enzymes and 5 coenzymes. So pyruvate dehydrogenase complex is used here, and here a molecule of NADH is produced and carbon dioxide is removed. So pyruvate is converted to acetyl CoA, and then citric acid cycle begins, that is also known as TCA cycle. Anaerobic fate of pyruvate: whenever there is the deficiency of oxygen, then pyruvate is converted to the lactate with the help of enzyme lactate dehydrogenase. It is converted to the lactate. Here the molecule of NADH is converted to NAD, and this NAD, as we know that in glycolysis NAD is used. So whenever our body is deficient in oxygen and it produces lactate, then this process is also used for our body, because wherever in our body NAD positive is required, this NAD positive reach there, especially it reaches in the glycolytic pathway where NADH is utilized and is converted into the NADH again. Then we can also see that here the structures of pyruvate, where it is NADH is converted into the NAD and lactate dehydrogenase enzyme is present, and the structure of lactate. So here we can see that there is the addition of hydrogen molecules. Here the bond is broken, and one hydrogen is added with the oxygen and one with the carbon. So here you can see one hydrogen is added with the carbon and one with the oxygen. So it is also known as the reduction reaction, because these two hydrogens are used, one here and one with the carbon. So double bond is broken and it is converted into the lactate. This is the alcoholic acid fermentation. This is alcoholic fermentation, not alcoholic acid. This is alcoholic fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation occurs only in yeast cells. So in yeast cells, pyruvate is converted into the acetaldehyde, and acetaldehyde is converted into the ethanol. Here enzyme, we know that TPP is a coenzyme, as I have also explained it in my lecture of vitamin B complexes and in the my lecture of pyruvate dehydrogenase, that TPP is a vitamin B1, and it is a coenzyme and it is used here. Also magnesium ions are used, and pyruvate dehydrogenase enzyme is used, and carbon dioxide molecules is released and it is converted into the acetaldehyde. From acetaldehyde, ethanol is formed, CH3 CH2OH, and here also the molecule of NADH is converted into the NAD positive. Here the enzyme is alcohol dehydrogenase. Next is the glucose is converted into the, we can here see the detailed description. Glucose is converted to pyruvate, then pyruvate is converted to acetyl CoA, and then whole citric cycle occurs, citric acid cycle occurs, and the 4 molecules of carbon dioxide produced per 2 molecules of pyruvate. So that this is the detail, this is the only the flow chart that how glucose is converted into carbon dioxide and water. So we know that glucose is converted into the pyruvate molecules with the help of glycolytic pathway. We have discussed the glycolytic pathway. Similarly, pyruvate is converted into the acetyl CoA with the help of enzyme pyruvate dehydrogenase. We have also discussed a detailed lecture about the pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, and then acetyl CoA is converted into the carbon dioxide and water molecules are produced here, and this we have also discussed a detailed description of the citric acid cycle. But this process occurs when there is an availability of oxygen. But whenever oxygen is not present in our body, or less oxygen is present, then the pyruvate molecules are converted into the lactate, and this is known as lactate formation. In fermentation to the lactate in vigorously contracting muscles, that muscles that vigorously contract, and especially I have told you earlier that in strenuous exercise, muscular exercise, in erythrocyte, that are known as the red blood cells, in some other cells, and in some microorganisms. So these processes in the presence of oxygen and in the absence of oxygen mainly occurs in our body, and lactate formation occurs in some bacteria also. But the we can see that this one, that is known as alcoholic fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation occurs only in the yeast, so it does not occurs in our body. It does not occurs in our body, but we have to remember it that whenever oxygen is deficient, most of the organisms can form lactate in our body, but yeast do not form lactate. They undergo the cycle to form the to convert the pyruvate into the ethanol. So ethanol is formed in the yeast. Pyruvate is reduced to form lactate, and reduction is done by NADH. This produces the NADH. This produces the NAD positive, which is used in the glycolysis. Lactic acid fermentation occurs in red blood cell because red blood cells have no mitochondria. So lactic acid fermentation, this is a very important point here, that one thing is that whenever our muscles are continuously working, then we have lesser supply of oxygen, and our body do not form the required amount of energy, and so it does not enter into the TCA cycle, and so thus it forms the lactate. But our red blood cells continually form the lactate. So the lactate fermentation, so lactate formation is continuously occurring in our body, because our red blood cells does not enter into the TCA cycle. So pyruvate that are produced due to the process of glycolysis is converted into the here it is converted into the lactate, because the red blood cells do not contain mitochondria, and we know that whenever a cell do not contain mitochondria, and we know that TCA cycle occurs in mitochondria. So if red blood cells do not have this mitochondria, so these cannot enter into the TCA cycle. So when these cannot enter into the TCA cycle, so the pyruvate forms the lactate here in the red blood cell. In few bacteria, red blood cells, this lactate is formed in skeletal muscles under hypoxia. Hypo means less, oxy means oxygen. Hypoxia condition also form this lactate molecule. So that was all about the fate of pyruvate. That what is the destiny or what is the fate of pyruvate, how and where the pyruvate is converted. So pyruvate can be converted into the lactate, and pyruvate can be converted into the ethanol, and pyruvate can be converted into acetyl CoA to continue the citric acid cycle. So it can enter into the total of three pathways. Two pathways mostly occur in our bodies, and most common organisms, and the rest of the pathway, the one pathway that is known as alcoholic fermentation, that occurs mostly in the yeast cell. So that was all about the lactate fate of the pyruvate. If you have any query related to this lecture, you can ask me in the comments.